2 weeks ago, somebody placed a substantial deposit on this house. They entered escrow. They committed real money. And then, for reasons nobody involved has explained publicly, they walked away. This is now the 4th time this property has failed to sell. It has been on the market for 2 years. It has been withdrawn and relisted repeatedly. It has taken 3 price reductions, and it currently sits at roughly 26% below where it started. It has 12 bedrooms, 24 bathrooms, a boxing ring, a 12-car garage, and 38,000 square feet of floor space. And nobody wants it. In May 2023, Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck bought this estate for just over $60,800,000.
One thing you can always trust in, oh God, family.
We do our best. We do try our best.
You don't need to worry about Ben. Let me just tell you.
In July 2024, it was listed for $68 million. As of this month, the asking price is just under $50 million, and the most recent buyer has withdrawn. The easy story here is a celebrity divorce. That story has been told several hundred times, and it explains almost nothing about why the house will not sell. So this film asks 4 different questions. Who can actually buy a house at this price? Why does a property this expensive lose value while ordinary houses gain it? What does it cost to own something nobody will take off your hands? And the question that turns out to matter most, does an invisible line on a map decide whether this sale is even viable? The answer to that last one is worth several $1 million. Start with the sequence, because the shape of it tells you more than any single number. Purchased in May 2023 for just over $60.8 million. Listed in July 2024 at $68 million, an asking price above what they paid, roughly 14 months earlier. 10 months later, in May 2025, the price was cut by $8 million to just under $60 million. At that level, a sale would have represented a loss of well under $1 million, almost break even. It did not sell. It was withdrawn and reappeared at around $52 million. It did not sell. In May 2026, it was cut again to just under $50 million. Then, in July 2026, a buyer entered escrow at that price, with what has been described as a substantial deposit, and withdrew. That withdrawal deserves a moment, because escrow is not a casual stage. By the time a transaction reaches it, a price has been agreed, an offer accepted, and money placed with a neutral third party. What follows is a period in which the buyer verifies everything: structural condition, title, permits, any legal encumbrance on the land, and arranges finance. Contracts normally give the buyer defined windows in which they may withdraw and recover their deposit. Once those windows close, walking away usually means forfeiting it. Nobody has said publicly which applies here, or why the buyer left. Reports describe the deposit as substantial, and the reason as unknown. But the signal is unambiguous either way. Someone with the means to complete examined this property in detail, at close range, with money already committed, and concluded that they would rather not. Now look at what that sequence does to a seller, because this is the part that is invisible from outside. Every property listing carries a visible history: days on market, every price reduction, every withdrawal and relisting. Buyers at this level, and the agents advising them, read that history before they read anything else. And a long history of reductions communicates something very specific. It says the seller is more motivated than the market. It says previous buyers looked and declined. And it invites every subsequent offer to come in lower, because the pattern suggests the price will fall again. Estate agents call this chasing the market down. You reduce to meet demand, demand moves lower because your reduction signaled weakness, and you reduce again. Withdrawing and relisting is an attempt to reset that counter. It rarely works at this level because the buyer pool is small enough that everybody already knows. And the size of that pool is the real problem. Consider what has to be true for someone to buy this house.
Which of your characters are you most similar to?
I think there's a little bit of me in all of the characters I play, but I would have to say Selena.
They must have roughly $50 million available for a residence. Not a net worth of $50 million. Available for one property without borrowing against something they would rather not touch. They must want to live in Los Angeles. They must want a house of 38,000 square feet, which is a very particular preference and by no means universal among the wealthy. They must want this specific house in this specific gated community with this specific interior. And they must be looking right now. Work through those filters, and the realistic buyer pool for a property like this is not thousands of people. It is not hundreds. Globally, at any given moment, it is plausibly a few dozen, and most of them already own something similar. This is the defining feature of trophy assets, and it applies equally to super yachts, aircraft, and significant artworks. An ordinary family home in a functioning market has thousands of potential buyers. If one declines, another appears. Price discovery is fast because the market is deep. At $50 million, there is no depth. Each potential buyer is a meaningful percentage of the entire market. When one walks away from escrow, as one just did, that is not a minor setback. That may be a significant fraction of everyone who is ever going to buy it this year. And that pool is competing against itself. This is not the only extraordinary property in Los Angeles seeking a buyer at this level, and every rival listing is another option for the same handful of people, which produces an effect that surprises most people. In a shallow market, supply matters far more than demand. One additional comparable listing does not reduce your buyer pool slightly, it may halve it. That is why timing is so unforgiving at this end of property. In an ordinary market, a good house sells eventually because buyers keep arriving. Here, if the 2 or 3 viable purchasers happen to be looking at something else, there is no queue behind them. There is nobody. And there is a second problem sitting underneath the first, which is the house itself. Look at what this property contains. 12 bedrooms, 24 bathrooms, a bar, a sports lounge, a fully equipped gymnasium, a boxing ring, a basketball court, and a pickleball court, a 12-car garage, a guest penthouse of 5,000 square feet, a caretaker's house, a 2-bedroom guardhouse. Every one of those features cost money to build. And here is the uncomfortable truth about almost all of them. A boxing ring inside a house is worth a great deal to somebody who boxes. To everybody else, it is a room that has to be removed. This is the central paradox of ultra-luxury property, and it is counterintuitive because it inverts how people think about quality. The more precisely a home is tailored to one person, the fewer people it fits.
Lopez and Ben Affleck have put their $91.5 million Beverly Hills mansion on the market.
Every bespoke decision narrows the buyer pool that was already vanishingly small. And the buyer who does eventually appear is likely to price in the cost of undoing the previous owner's choices. Capferer and Bastian make a related argument in the luxury strategy, that genuine luxury is defined by its distance from mass appeal. That works superbly for a handbag, which one person buys and keeps. It works very badly for an asset you eventually need somebody else to purchase. And notice something else about the specification. 24 bathrooms is not a comfort feature, it is a maintenance liability. Every one of them contains plumbing that will eventually fail, fittings that will date, and surfaces that require upkeep. And bespoke interiors carry a second problem, which is that they age faster than plain ones. A neutral, well-proportioned room can be updated. A room designed around a specific finish, a specific era of taste, a specific owner's enthusiasm, cannot. It can only be replaced. The more distinctive the choice, the more precisely it dates itself. So a property like this depreciates in a way that is invisible on any balance sheet. The structure holds its value. The interior quietly stops being an asset and starts being a demolition estimate. Which brings us to the cost of simply continuing to own it. A property does not pause while it waits for a buyer. It runs, continuously, at full cost. Property tax in California is assessed on purchase value, so an estate acquired at $60 million generates an annual bill in the high hundreds of thousands. 38,000 square feet requires climate control, and the systems maintaining it run whether or not anybody is inside. Grounds of that scale require permanent staff. A vacant, high-value property requires monitored security, which is more expensive than occupied security, because insurers treat an empty house as a substantially higher risk. Insurance in California has become its own difficulty. Carriers have been withdrawing from high-value residential cover in wildfire-exposed areas, and premiums on estates of this kind have risen sharply. Add maintenance across a structure of this age and complexity, and the pool, and the courts, and the guest accommodation, and the guardhouse. No public accounting of these figures exists, and we are not going to invent one. What can be said with confidence is the direction. That carrying an empty estate of this size costs a meaningful multiple of what most people earn in a year, every year, indefinitely. And under the amended settlement reported in April, she is now solely responsible for the costs of any eventual sale. Broker commissions, taxes, and closing costs, after her former husband transferred his share to her. There is one further cost that never appears on any invoice, and at this scale, it is usually the largest of all. Roughly $60 million is currently immobilized inside a building. That capital is not earning anything. It is not invested, it is not generating income, and it cannot be deployed. Economists call this opportunity cost, the return you gave up by choosing one use of money over another. Over 2 years, on a sum of that size, the figure involved is not trivial. It is plausibly larger than the price reductions themselves. That is what makes illiquidity genuinely expensive. Not the maintenance, the waiting, which makes the next section considerably more consequential for her than for most sellers. In November 2022, voters in the city of Los Angeles approved a measure known as ULA, united to house LA. It created an additional transfer tax on high-value property sales to fund affordable housing programs. It survived legal challenge and it remains in force. The mechanism is simple and unusually harsh. 4% on sales above the lower threshold, 5.5% on sales above the upper one. Thresholds are indexed to inflation and were updated on the 1st of July 2026. And here is what makes it different from almost every other tax discussed on this channel. It is charged on the gross sale price, not on the profit, not on the gain. A seller who bought at 60 million and sells at 50 million has made a substantial loss. Under a normal capital gains regime, they would owe nothing. Under this measure, at that price, the charge would run to roughly $2.75 million, payable at closing on a transaction that lost money. The seller pays it. It is not deductible against the gain. The effect on the market has been substantial and well documented. Industry reporting describes a market where owners simply decline to list, preferring to hold indefinitely rather than absorb the charge. Reform proposals have repeatedly reached the Los Angeles City Council. As of this month, a ballot measure to amend it was shelved. The structure also creates something agents call the cliff effect, and it distorts behaviour in a way worth understanding. Because the tax applies to the entire sale price rather than to the amount above a threshold, crossing that threshold by a single dollar triggers the charge on everything beneath it. A sale just below the upper tier and a sale just above it can differ by a few $1,000s in price and by hundreds of thousands in what the seller actually receives. So listings cluster artificially just underneath the lines. Prices that would otherwise be set by the property are instead set by the tax code.
It just happens that way. It's a funny thing. Life.
E.T. has learned the singer listed her family home for $42.5 million.
And sellers who cannot price below a threshold, because their property is genuinely worth more, find themselves paying the full charge with no way to structure around it. But there is a detail here that almost nobody outside the industry understands, and it is the reason this section exists. The measure applies only inside the city of Los Angeles. Beverly Hills is a separate incorporated city. So are West Hollywood and Santa Monica. Properties there are not subject to it at all. Which means two comparable estates on adjacent streets can face a difference of millions of dollars on an identical sale, determined entirely by which side of an invisible municipal boundary they sit on. And this property is a genuine illustration of how confusing that is. Coverage describes it variously as Beverly Hills and as Bel Air. Those are not the same jurisdiction, and the distinction has a price attached that runs into the millions. We are not going to assert which side it falls on, because the reporting is inconsistent, and the answer requires the parcel record rather than a press description. But that ambiguity is the lesson. At this level, the address is not a location, it is a tax position. So what does this actually teach? 3 things, and none of them are about celebrity. The first is that value and price are different things, and only one of them is real. This estate has been assigned 4 different prices in 2 years. Its value is whatever a buyer will actually pay. And so far, that figure does not exist. Until a transaction completes, every number attached to a unique asset is a hypothesis. The second is that liquidity and prestige move in opposite directions. The most desirable version of almost any asset is the hardest one to sell, because desirability at the top means scarcity of buyers as much as scarcity of supply. A modest house sells in weeks. A trophy sells in years, or not at all. The third is that ownership costs run continuously while a sale does not. Every month this property fails to sell, it consumes money. The loss is not the gap between 68 million and 50 million. It is that gap plus 2 years of carrying costs, plus whatever the transfer charge turns out to be, plus everything that capital could have earned elsewhere. There is a version of this story where a wealthy woman struggles to sell a mansion, and it is difficult to sympathise. That version is not interesting, and it is not what happened. What happened is that 2 people bought the most expensive kind of asset there is, personalised it heavily, and then needed to convert it back into money at a moment they did not choose. That is the sequence that damages fortunes at every level. Not spending, being forced to sell. The house is not the story. The house is a beautiful, well-built, 38,000 square foot demonstration of a single principle. Anything you cannot sell quickly is not an asset. It is a commitment. Privilege index. Where wealth isn't measured by what people own, but by what it takes to keep it.